Hi guys, this is our help video on our distributed objects rollout. So there's going to be two different types of really scattering that we do with objects. It's listed as three, but two of them are very much the same. Ordered and random pattern is an overall shared spacing where individual objects have their own individual spacing. This will make sense in a little bit as I just given some examples here. Mainly for complex modeling stuff, you're going to always be using individual pattern. For simpler stuff, and let's just jump over to a different file here, you're going to use the individual pattern because the ordered or random pattern because it's very easy to use for simple stuff like fences and stuff like that. So let's just add a spline real quick. And I am going to add our post object. Now, when I first add this, like right now, let's just not make anything a post or anything. I'm just going to put this in ordered pattern, and I'm going to select my post and my 3 pickets. Okay, so I missed one. Let me just pick one more. That one. Okay, so I've got my 3 pickets. Now, if I go to the overall spacing of this and I bring this down, essentially what this is doing, I have no post object, so it's not putting anything on the corner knots. It is basing this on an ordered pattern. So it's putting the first post, the second picket, third picket, fourth picket, then going to a post again, doing the same. It's just a ordered pattern as it goes around. And if you need to shift these around, you can simply go up to where they have a number next to them, and I could say, okay, we'll lower this one down. And now you can see that they are both on number 1. So that means if I go to this fence picket and I raise this up, it's actually stacked on top. So this is the way this works. So if you needed to be, say, a post with a straight pole and you needed to have an ornament on the top of it, stuff like that, means that you can stack objects. So let's just raise this one up. Sorry, down. And now it's back to a pattern as well. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. Now, the other one that's very similar to this is just random pattern. And random pattern doesn't really care what numbers you have here. It's just going to shift them around as a random pattern. And you can seed this as much as you want, and you'll get something that's random. Okay. Now, 2 other things that are useful in here are end objects and post objects. So I'm going to put this back to an ordered pattern. And I'm going to take that 1 picket, which is raised up, and you can actually tell by the colors here. So we have this blue object, and I'm just going to put this back down. And we're going to go to our post object, and I'm going to say make a post. Now, what that has done is now it's going to seem like everything's a little strange. Well, that's because post has its own spacing. So if I set this to 200, it's going to give me a post at every knot or a distance of 200. So it's going to check between that. Now, the other objects are still spaced by this all spacing. So if I wanted to have posts in between here, I can. And there is a little threshold here. If I go down to the post itself, let me select the post. I have this post padding. And I can raise this up, and it's how much spacing I need around that post for my fence. So I might have a really big object. I don't want my pickets to be halfway into my post. So you have that as well. Now, the other special object is an end object. So I'm just going to pick this one here, and that's my end object. So right now it thinks it's like the pickets. It's going to scatter it around in an ordered pattern. So I would need to go down to the end, and instead of hitting post, I have an make end button here. So that puts this on the start and end of my spline. Now, of course, it's a little rotated around, so let's just go down to the end object. Also, when you make something a post or an end, it shifts it down to the bottom, so you still see your ordered pattern. It just says P or E at the end. All right, so let's rotate this around. Let's just put this at 90. And I can say to this end object, I want to shift it in because I want it to be exactly at the end of my spline. And I can go to the end offset and do the same thing. Now you can see that sort of it's overlapping stuff. So I can go into my all objects then and actually do an all offset. And that'll change everything but the end objects. So it just gives me a little room to play. So the all stuff sometimes is very useful to use instead of just going in and trying to change it on all the objects themselves. Now, when it comes to ordered or random, you can only do the end offset on posts or end objects or all the objects. You can't do it on individuals. That's for the individual pattern. All right. So with that said, this is a very sort of simplistic scattering process. Like I said, random or ordered. It's great for fences. You could do a whole line of parked cars and use that. One thing that's useful with the parked cars is this whole mirrored rotation mirror. And this is basically this or that option. So you want cars to either be parked in at 0 or 180 degrees. You don't want to do a variation of that. So either parked in forward or backwards. So, all right, let's jump to something a little more complex. We'll go back to our spaceship example and we'll add some objects into this. So the first thing I want to add in is my grill object. So let's go select one of these. And I want this to start at the beginning of the spline. So I'm going to go in the top view here, and you can actually see the pivot point must have been in the center for this object. So let's grab this hazard object, and I'm going to say make the start offset. So I want it to start at the beginning of our spline. There we go. Now, you'll see some measurements show up in here. This is the width, height, and depth of an object itself. So if you need to sort of figure out spacing, like right now, my grills are overlapping. Now, I could turn the spacing up and eye this if I wanted to, but it wouldn't be exact because in the very beginning it would work, but as we got way further down the spline, it might not be overlapping the same distance. So this is where our measurement tool sort of comes into play. So we can look at this thing and say, okay, well, it's 112.27 in length, so I can say 112.27 in length, and now they're exactly spaced. So the measurement tools come in use a lot of the time, especially when you're doing complex modeling. All right, now, also the other thing to keep in mind is like building a cobblestone road, if things turn corners, there would be different spacing. So I'm going to just shift this object out and in, and you'll actually see what I mean. So as I bring this object in, sorry, let's just go to the top view. As I bring this object in, you're going to see in or out, it's going to add objects because it does its own individual spacing for where the path is. So you don't need to worry about overlapping geometry because it does figure out, it essentially says, well, let's just pretend there's a spline here now and let's do the spacing on that. There's different areas where you might not want that, so that's where we have something else as well that will help with mirroring. But where this does come useful, so let's move this to our center. Let's just move this grill in, and we'll put it to where it's supposed to be. Oops. All right, slide this in. Great. All right, so it's sitting in its grill. Now, I'm going to want to put one on the other side. Now, if I was to say mirror this to the other side, which I do down here, it's going to give me another set. So I don't actually have to load in another grid object. Now, that also has its own offset, so you're not going to affect that. So once I set its own offset up, and if I was to go back now and globally move its in and out positioning, it's going to move both of them. So if we look at this from the top, we can see that now we have a completely different count on this side that we would have on that side. So that sort of helps with scattering tools or scattering objects around corners and stuff like that. So if you were to do a cobblestone street, the tighter the turn, you're not going to really have overlapping stones. So, all right. So that's basically shifting objects around. So we're basically, this is the X and the Y is your in and out. The Z is your up and down. We'll talk about this move object from position a little later. This is very important when you need objects to be in the exact same position, but they're different sizes. So their pivot points would be in different, like a light on a lamppost. This is where you'd actually use this, and we'll give you an example of that later. And then, of course, we have all our rotations and everything that we'd need when we bring in an object. All right, let's grab something else. Let's grab this one here. So this is going to cover up our joints to our grates. So let's just grab this one here. And we're going to need to probably, we already knew the size of this grid's number, so 1012. Let's just copy this. Now we can go to the hazard grate. Let's do an offset, a start offset of that, and then we can do a spacing of that. And then we should be right for our grills. So let's just move this out. And now we'll cover every spot where that grill comes in. So like you can see, this grill thing is useful. All right, so I'm gonna go down, and that looks good. Just gonna lower this down just a little bit. Oops, too much. And there we go. So we have our covers. Now you're gonna wanna do the same thing, mirror this to the other side. And we will need to do a little bit of an offset of this to get that in the right position. And then we can grab our next piece. Now, our next piece, we're gonna want, this little clamp is gonna made to go 2 of these in between each. And then on the other side, so like pretty much bringing in 4 objects. So let's go select this. And I'm gonna take the math from our grill hazard, and I'm gonna say copy this. And then I'm gonna select this other object, and I'm gonna say paste. And what it's gonna do is it's now copied it to this position. So I can simply just offset my spacing now. So let's offset this startup spacing, and we'll raise this up just a little bit. And now you can see that because we've copied that, it's done our mirror, it's done our mirror offset, it's done our spacing. It's just saved us a lot of time of typing in a lot of numbers. Now, like I said, there's 2 of these in here between each grid. We don't need to bring in another one of those. We can actually go down here and say number of clones. We want 1 number of clone, and then the clone offset we want to be, say, that amount. So now essentially what we've done is we brought in 4 objects, and we've mirrored and cloned those. So now we have, just from one instance, we have 4. So you can see you can build up things pretty easily. It's not hard at all to do this. I mean, this is just simple stuff. You're just stacking it up. I'll give you a more example of some of these beams. All right, so if I bring these in, and let's do a spacing of these beams of something a little quite more dramatic. And then let's say I wanted 10 beams, a doorway, 10 beams, a doorway. I could actually go down here and say, give me 10 clones, and then offset those. So I could actually have my 10 beams, a doorway, 10 beams, a doorway. It makes it a little more parametric. And we're actually came across a new feature that we'll be adding in the next release, which will make this tool 10 times more useful. So it's not going to be a grid. It's not going to be a grid-based system or a node-based system yet. We might add that. We've had a couple of people already ask, can you make it node-based? Well, the reason we made this was to make it really easy. But we might have both interfaces. But we'll look at that in the future. But yeah, the next release will make a big change to this as well. All right, so let's just go shift this to our outside of where it would have 10 beams. And we're going to talk about the mirroring options again. So if I mirror this to the other side and then set its offset, okay, you can see that as we go around the corner, we have different distances. Now, if these were beams that were supposed to be there in the ship, we can actually go in and say clone mirror exactly. And what this is going to do is it's going to ignore what spacing it's going to need to have. It's going to pick the spacing on this side and ignore the spacing on this side and give you an exact clone to the other side. So now you can see that you have 20, 20, and 20, even though we're going around a corner. So that is the two different sort of parametric clone options that we have. And that, like I said, that comes in useful when you're doing beams or supports when they need to have one across the other side. Where if you were doing lampposts, those would probably be on a normal, say, 10 or 20 meter spacing. All right. So there's not a lot to scattering these out. We do have some, quite a bit of features in here. You can actually do random offset, so you could actually get quite a bit of difference from how much your doorway would be. So let's say we have spacing as minimum of this and then bring this up. So if this was really long, you'd get a whole bunch of different variation in between this. Same thing with variation in positioning or rotation. So let's just go into the grid, let's say the hazard grid, and let's set random transformation on that, and we said, turn off unified scale, and just did, not that one, let's do height wise. So you could actually have, random heights on these. Same thing with random rotations, random spacing, even random positioning on the objects themselves. So I could say, well, I want them to be, you're going to get a completely random spacing that way. So these settings are more in the individual spacing than the basic modes, like the random and ordered. Also, the other thing to keep in mind is you can bring lights into this. So if we take our SiClone, we treat lights as just any other object. So let's just go pick this. We have this V-ray light here. Just going to go pick this one. And when it comes into the scene, of course, because we have to draw it as mesh, it comes in as these little light bulbs. So you have to keep in mind the size of these. We played with doing, we'll do the bounding box of the light and see, if we can make the lights, the geometry the same size. Well, that bounding box takes in the account for fall off and all the other stuff, so you end up with just drastic sizes that aren't really useful. So we've done all our lights at the same size. So basically you can do your spacing, everything, space out your lights, change this around. Now I'm going to give you an example of probably this overall spacing on the lights. So let's just take our beams, and I'm going to say copy, and I'm going to take our lights, and I'm going to say paste. And what it's done is it's put a light on every beam, even though it's using the mirror. Now, because these happen to be in the same space, all the lights are lined up. But if I had something that was bigger, say coming up here and arched out, and the pivot point happened to be in the center, we have something that's called move object from pivot. So you can actually move this object from pivot, and it shall still line up with all your spacing of your posts. So it's not accounting for the spacing itself. So it's not taking one less light away here on the corner, because it's actually just moving that pivot in. It's still accounting on the spacing of the posts themselves. So, lights, it doesn't really care. Bring in anything. If you do have a target light, though, it does turn off the target, because you do need to. We can't manage a target and a position in the moving stuff around. So any other questions sort of go into, oh, actually, you know what? Let's just, before I quit here, let's go back to the fence thing. I just want to bring in, talk about something else. We did talk about up and down, but we didn't talk about the null object. So right now I have an ordered pattern, and you can see this saying, you know, dark blue, light blue, and very light blue, and those are in an ordered pattern. Now, if I wanted to add a null object, say a space, I can do that. And you'll see it's just shows up as a white, and it's called null objects. So now what we have is we have an ordered spacing with null objects in here. This is where, on a random pattern, it gets interesting when you're doing parking lots, because you always want random empty spaces for parking. So that's our null object, and more talking about doing our simple scattering. So, like I said, any other questions, sort of take a look at our form. Thanks a lot, guys. See you.